And so the author says, may Allah have mercy upon him, receiving. It is too risky to sell what you buy before you or your agent receives it. So we're still under risky business. Our talking about receiving your merchandise has been inserted under the chapter of risky business because in order for you to sell what you own, you have to receive it first. It's too risky to sell it before you receive it, or your agent receives it. For your agent to receive it is like for you to receive it. That means you send someone on your behalf and say to him, go get such and such for me. Go pick up such and such package for me or such and such merchandise for me. Go receive such and such shipment for me. So it's too risky to sell what you buy before you or your agent receives it. Even if back to the seller himself. Yani, you can't sell it back to the seller before you receive it unless you sell it back for the same price. That's the only way you can sell it back to the seller without receiving it. To sell it back to him for the same price. And he has to accept also. You can't force him to take it back. Once the contract is concluded, he doesn't have to accept to buy it back from you. Because that's what he's doing. When you go back to the store to return an item, you're calling it returning the item. Okay. But what are you really doing? You're selling it back to them. It became yours. The money you gave them became theirs. We will, though, inshallah, talk about canceling a sale when we get to it. So, unless you sell it back to the buyer for the same price before you receive it, and he accepts, for this would actually be voiding the contract. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said to Hakim ibn Hizam, sell not anything until you take hold of it. You likewise cannot rent out an apartment that you rented before you receive it. That means to sublease it. You can't sublease before you receive what you rented. How do you receive it? We're going to say right now, you have three cases. It is received by one, taking it in the hand, if it can be carried by the hand, like a book. So anything like that, some clothing, for example, anything you can carry in your hand. Receiving it is by taking it by the hand. That's the same thing for a gift, by the way. We'll come to talk about that. If someone gives you a gift and you don't take it, you don't actually receive it, he can take it back. It's his until you receive it. So how do you receive it? By taking it in the hand if it can be carried by the hand, like a book. So if someone gives you a gift that you want to keep, you want it to be yours religiously, take it. Don't leave it there. Like he puts it on the table for you to take it. You're sitting across from him. And then you just leave it sitting there. You never physically reached and took it in your hand. And it's something that can be taken by the hand. It's not yours yet. Two, by transporting it from the seller's property, like a car or a refrigerator or a small boat. That's if it's something that can't be carried by the hand. And don't mix here purchasing it with receiving it. Remember, the purchase itself, the sale itself, the contract itself is the words. When you say to the person, I buy this from you for such and such, and he says, I accept. Or he says to you, I sell this to you for such and such, and you say, I accept. Or he says, buy this from me for such and such. Or you say, sell this to me for such and such. And then the other side says, I accept. Then that's the contract, that's the sale. Now it's yours, even before any exchange. But you can't sell it until you receive it. So if it's something that's too big to take it in the hand, to merely grab it in your hand and leave with it, or just grab it in your hand even without leaving, then the way to receive it is by transporting it from the seller's property, yani taking it out of the seller's property. So, for example, you purchased a car. Okay, you purchased it. It's yours now. Can you sell it? Not until you get it out of the lot of the seller. Just take it out of his lot, park it on the sidewalk, for example. Now you've received it. Now you can sell it. And like that for a refrigerator or a small boat or the like. Number three is taking unrestricted control of a house or a piece of land or a ship, yani a big ship. This means the seller removes his things and submits the keys. Now you've received it. And the seller needs to remove his things unless he's going to just let you keep the stuff that's in there. The buyer cannot be blocked from receiving the item whether he buys with cash or credit. When we say he buys with credit, means he didn't pay you yet. You can't say, pay me first, then you can take it. La. Once you do the contract, it's his. You can't stop him from taking it by himself or by his proxy. So then you have three ways of receiving. One, take it in the hand, if it can be taken by the hand. Two, transport it from the seller's property, if it's too big to be taken by the hand, but it's transferable, it's movable, it can be relocated. Or three, by taking unrestricted control of it, if it's not something that's transportable. The judgment of a deal. When we say the judgment, what does that mean? This goes back to al-ahkam al-khamsa, the 5 judgments. That's for all of fiqh. Obligatory, haram, sunnah, makruh, mubah. The 5 judgments. And some scholars add 2 more, valid and invalid. That makes 7 judgments. Mubah means indifferent. Yeah, unless, wait. You don't own it, so you can't sell what you don't own. You can't sell what you don't own unless you have authorization. And authorization is going to come from the owner, or authorization is going to come from the religion. Like, and we're going to talk about this. When I say authorization might come from the religion, it's like when you're in charge of a child's money, when you're the guardian of the child. So the religion puts you in charge of his money and you can deal with it properly. So you have authorization. Or the Muslim judge, or the Muslim judge told you, handle this. Now you have authorization to deal with some money. So if you don't own it, you can't sell it. And even if you do own it, you can't sell it before you receive it, or your authorized person receives it. You're welcome. So now we want to look at the judgment of a deal. A dealing might be valid, yani sahih. Sahih, that means valid. Like what? Like selling what one thinks belongs to someone else, though it truly belongs to him. That's valid. Yani, for example, you thought some money belonged to your relative, and then you took it and you sold it, believing it belonged to your relative. But actually, your relative died and it became yours by inheritance, and you never even knew that it became yours. And then you found out later that actually it was yours at the time you sold it, though you didn't know it was. This is a valid sale because it actually was yours in reality. Your intention at that, your intention doesn't matter here. Meaning, when I say your intention, I mean, when you sold it, believing that you were basically doing an invalid haram sale and you weren't fearing Allah and you just did it anyway, this belief of yours at that moment, it doesn't affect the validity of the sale when it was actually yours in reality. So that's a valid sale. Or another example, selling a cup of wheat from a pile without knowing how many cups that pile contains. Selling a cup of wheat from a pile without knowing how many cups that pile contains. That means when we say selling a cup, so that word a is very important while we're talking about dealings here, because all these dealings are building on each other. We already talked about the difference between selling a specific thing and selling a non-specific thing. So selling a cup means some cup, a cup among the cups. So which cup, how many cups are even in this pile doesn't matter here. This is valid without knowing how many cups that pile contains. Selling a cup of wheat from a pile without knowing how many cups that pile contains, that's valid. Or also a marriage without the mention of a dowry by consensus. Marriage without mentioning a dowry, that's valid by consensus, means all madhabs say that if you get married without any mention of a dowry, that's a valid marriage and you still owe a dowry anyway. So it means the man says to you, I give my daughter in marriage to you in the presence of witnesses, proper witnesses. And then you say, I accept. And that's it. With no mention of a dowry, this is a valid marriage. As long as all the conditions are fulfilled. So that means, in other words, a dowry is not a condition for a marriage. Rather, a dowry is bound to a marriage contract. It just comes along with the marriage contract. You can't get away from it. Mentioning it just determines exactly what you owe. Not mentioning it is not going to get rid of it. And it's not going to invalidate your marriage. So then, what do you owe her if you don't mention any dowry? Then you owe her what a woman like her deserves. That's called mahru al-mithl. That means the commensurate dowry. That means commensurate dowry. A dowry for a woman like her. What does that mean, a woman like her? It means whatever makes that woman more or less desirable for marriage. Like what? Like youth. Like, meaning youth versus old age. Like virginity versus deflowered. Like beauty. Like knowledge. Like etc. Like she has children or she doesn't have children. How well can she speak? All the things that make her more or less desirable for marriage. So the more desirable she is for marriage, then the more her dowry would be, the more a woman like her would take as a dowry. Heck is it? Sure. So imagine a woman who is, let's say, she's 20 years old. She's very beautiful. She's very knowledgeable. She's virgin. Comes from good family. Okay, so that means she's so desirable. Like so many men would like to marry her. Versus a woman, let's say she's 40 years old and she doesn't have the shape of the young woman and she's not virgin. Let's say she has 3 kids, etc. So that means she's not as desirable by so many men, not like the younger one that we just described. So one of those is going to be, for example, offered a higher dowry. A higher dowry. We're talking in general here, of course. Like a man's going to say to her, what do you want? I'll give you anything to marry me. For the younger one, for example. And then the other ones, man's going to say, what do you want for dowry? 500, for example. Not anything. I'm not going to give you anything. That's clear. So marrying a woman without any mention of a dowry, doesn't remove the dowry. Number one, it doesn't invalidate the marriage. Number two, it doesn't drop the dowry. And what would her dowry be? It would be what a woman like her would take as a dowry. And also, you consider some things like the society, and you consider also some things like what did her mother take as a dowry? What did her sisters and her aunts take as a dowry? What do the women like her in her society take as a dowry? All those are taken into consideration for determining what is a dowry for a woman like her. She doesn't have to accept because you have to give her a dowry that's commensurate. I mean, Wafiq. And also, you can still agree on something. Even if you don't mention a dowry, you can still agree on something, which that's basically just going to be a settlement. So you did the marriage without any mention of dowry, and you know that you owe her, and you fear Allah, you want to fulfill her rights, and so you say to her, I owe you a dowry. What would you like? And then, so you make a settlement and give her something, for example, that you agree on. If you don't want to give her something that you agree on, you have to give her what a woman like her takes. So that's a judgment for a deal, valid, and we just took some examples. Also, a deal could be invalid, such as selling what no slave of God owns. What's something that no slave of God owns? Like a freeman, a free human being. You can't basically kidnap someone and then sell them. That's an invalid sale. Or public land, or a river. You can't sell a river. Or unclaimed land, like just in the wilderness, no one owns it. You have to develop it first. We already talked about developing land. Then, if you develop it, then you can sell it, or else you can't sell it because nobody owns it. And what else? Like najasa, blood, feces, urine, you can't sell that. So you can't sell manure to a farmer. You can't sell wine. You can't sell haram meat. Yes. I don't know that you can donate the manure, but if you can, let's say, package that manure and then sell the packaging, like put it in crates and then sell the crate with the manure inside of it without selling the manure. And that's how you're going to buy alcohol if you needed to. Buy the container. Don't buy the liquid because it's najis. Also, selling what is not money, like a mere grain or two, 1 grain of rice or 2 grains of rice. That's an invalid sale because it's not money. You need to collect a number of grains until it has a value. Once you have enough grains that it has some monetary value, then you can sell that for a penny or a nickel or a dime or whatever. But 1 grain or 2 grains doesn't have a monetary value. And like that, you need to be mindful. So some things, they're not going to have a value. Even if we didn't mention it here, you might find yourself in a deal or having a proposal, getting a proposal, and then because you've learned, you might say, does that even have a value? And no, I'm not going to buy that. Or let me ask if I can. Yani, because this amounts to being sought. What we're talking about amounts to being sought in the first place. Also, what's an invalid sale? The sale of someone who's restricted. We're going to talk about the restricted one. That means he's barred from his own money. His assets are frozen religiously. Like a child who didn't reach puberty. According to Ash-Shafi'i, he can't sell anything. Even with his parents' permission. According to Shafi'i, his parents can't give him permission. He can only wait until he reaches puberty, and then he can sell. We'll come to talk about that, inshallah. Or a sale with an extraneous condition. We mentioned that last week. Extraneous condition means the condition has nothing to do with the sale, Like if someone says to you, I'll sell this to you if my father comes home. That condition of his father coming home has nothing to do with the sale. So it's not valid. Yani, the whole sale is not valid. You can't agree to that. You can't say, I accept. Tell him, remove the condition. Just sell it to me and I'll accept. 5, a sale or marriage with an expiration. A sale or marriage with an expiration. It's invalid. Like to say, I sell this to you for a year. That's completely invalid. Rather, what would you do instead of selling it to him for a year? What should you do? Rent it to him. Exactly. And as for a marriage with an expiration, that's mut'ah marriage, which is basically prostitution. That's like renting a woman. That's prostitution. That's haram, invalid. 6, a usurious sale. Riba sale, which we're going to come to. Riba sales involve 3 things: gold, silver, and food. That's it. Gold, silver, and food. So remember, riba, which we usually just translate as usury, riba is 2 cases. Riba debt, yani a loan that has interest, that's riba. A loan with interest, that's riba. Riba of the loan. And the other type is the riba sale. The riba loan is known and famous. All the Muslims know it. The riba sale, many Muslims don't know it. Selling food for food is subject to riba. So if you know any incarcerated Muslims, you need to tell them. Be mindful, learn the rules, because the incarcerated ones, most of their money is food. So they will be so often selling food for food. And they're going to then be so often falling into riba because of not knowing the rules of how to do that. We're going to come to it, inshallah. So if they did fall into riba by selling food for food the wrong way, which we're not going to now go into details, it's going to be an invalid sale and a major sin. Or selling gold for gold, or silver for silver, or gold for silver. There's rules there too. So the riba sales break into 2 cases. One case involves food for food, and the other case involves bullion for bullion. That's another important word when you're learning the dealings. If we're speaking in English, yani, in our lessons at least. I don't know how else somebody's going to talk if he's teaching you dealings in English. Bullion, which is gold and silver in any form, regardless of the form. Coins, bars, jewelry, doesn't matter. Gold or silver, that's bullion. So bullion for bullion has its rules. And food for food has its rules, which we'll come to by the permission of our generous Lord, inshallah. So if someone doesn't do those sales properly, it's going to be invalid. Like somebody goes to a pawn shop with some gold, and then he trades that gold for some other gold. If he doesn't observe the rules, it's going to be a major sin. It's going to be invalid. Also, a debt for a debt. We talked about that last week. Also, the sale of an unrightfully forced person. The sale of someone who was forced unrightfully. And unrightful is an important word because the Muslim judge could force you to sell sometimes. Like if you're bankrupt and you need to pay whom you owe, the judge could force you to sell. Or like you have to support your wife and you don't, and you're able to. If you sell something, the judge might force you to sell. That's valid forcing. And then it's going to be a valid sale. But unrightfully forcing a person to sell or buy is invalid sale. Like, as I was told, there used to be houses around the Prophet's masjid, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Private property. Private property. Means the caliph can't take it from you. Even the caliph. It's private property. So when they wanted to expand the masjid of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, I was told, and I didn't research it, that the people who owned their private property around there, they were forced out of their homes and paid, driven out of their homes and paid. So that's invalid sale. And I was told, if you know those spots, if you go to the Prophet's Masjid and you know those, if you know that history and you know those areas, don't pray there. Say that again, please. No, I don't. And number 9 here, weapons, selling weapons to our combatant. It's an invalid sale. Although selling weapons alone is lawful and valid, but not to the enemy combatant. It's going to be invalid. Even selling weapons to someone who's going to use them to assault people is valid, but not to the combatant, though. That's different. Selling weapons to the combatant against the Muslims is invalid sale. And selling forbidden musical instruments, invalid sale, even if its pieces could be useful if they were broken. Meaning, someone has a guitar, and then he says, buy it from me. You tell him, that's a haram instrument, I can't buy it from you. It's useless. It has no religiously recognized benefit. He says, well, you can put it in the fireplace. It'll burn as firewood. It's still not valid. Meaning, in the form that it is in. You can't buy it in that form. And also included there is what? Selling idols. Cannot sell idols. Invalid sale, even if they were made of gold. And when we said you can't sell najasa, that includes dogs. And it is confirmed from the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that he forbade the price of a dog. It means it cannot be bought or sold. But don't forget, that doesn't mean that it can't be obtained. When we say you can't sell something, that doesn't mean you can't obtain it. That means you can't do a contract for it. If someone had a puppy and said, here, you want this puppy? You can say, yeah, I'll take it. But if he wants to sell it to you, you can't buy it. So we just talked about now valid sale or deal or invalid deal. Now let's go back to the first type, the valid one. It breaks into categories. It could be obligatory. That could be an obligatory sale or deal, like selling or buying to pay a due debt. You owe money. You don't have the cash, but you do have the assets. If you sell them, you could pay your debt and it's due. Then if that's the only way to pay your debt, you'd be obligated to sell. Or for obligatory support, or for an obligatory hajj. An obligatory hajj. That means you can't afford to make this hajj. You haven't made hajj yet, and you can't afford it by virtue of your estate. You might not have the cash per se, but you do have the estate that makes you able to afford it. Then you'd be obligated to sell so that you could, liquidate that and then pay for your hajj. Is liquidate the right word there? Barakallahu feekum. Also, the complete dowry, that's obligatory. Paying that complete dowry is obligatory after consummation or death. If you married a woman and consummated the marriage with her, you owe her a complete dowry. Or if she died, then you owe her a complete dowry. How are you going to pay her dowry though if she died? That means you're going to submit that to her heirs. You're going to say to her heirs, this money was her dowry. Now it has to go into the inheritance to be distributed properly. Take this money that belonged to her, that was owed to her, and distributed it properly to her heirs. But not privacy. You don't owe her a complete dowry just by only having privacy with her. That's the Shafi'i school. The Hanafi school says, yes, by mere privacy is enough to owe her a complete dowry. So any brothers who do Hanafi contract, keep that in mind. If you get married according to Abu Hanifa, then remember that by just having privacy with her, you will owe her a complete dowry. And the reconciliation payment for divorce after consummation, also very important, meaning a man married a woman, consummated the marriage with her, and then he divorced her. Then he owes her a mut'ah. That's a payment. It's like a dowry. The mut'ah is like a dowry. When you marry her, you have to pay her a dowry. When you divorce her, you have to pay her a mut'ah. And in between, you have to support her as long as she makes herself available to you. So when we say it's like a dowry, that means it doesn't have any specific value. Whatever is valid to be a dowry is valid to be a mut'ah for divorcing her. So remember that, remind the brothers. Brothers are marrying women and then divorcing them and then not giving them any payment after divorcing them. Most likely because of ignorance or forgetfulness. It's important not to be ignorant or forgetful, which is basically here being heedless, because that's going to be an obligation written on you. Whether you knew it or you didn't know it, there's going to be an obligation written on you, and then you're going to die, and then you're going to come back Yawm al-Qiyamah, and you're going to find that you owe her something. And you would have rather paid her now than pay her then. Divorce from him, from his side. Not if it comes from her side. Coming from her side is like she had grounds to break the marriage, so she went to the Muslim judge and she got the marriage broken by the Muslim judge. Then he doesn't owe her a mut'ah. But in general, when he divorces her from himself, he has to pay her. And so remind any brothers who married sisters and didn't pay them, get in touch with them and say, I owe you something. How about I give you, what, $20? Do you accept? $50, $100? Do you accept? I have a car here. You accept? So he can clear himself. What did the Prophet say? Sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Whoever owes his fellow Muslim concerning money or honor, then let him redeem that. Yani, let him pay it before there comes a day when there is neither a golden coin nor a silver coin. Correct. It's just like a dowry. No maximum or minimum. She doesn't have to accept for him to be able to divorce her. Just like she doesn't have to accept for him to be able to marry another woman also. That's why the woman must be careful who she marries, because her husband has a severe upper hand over her. Does she have to accept the amount of the mut'ah? I don't know. I'll have to check that. Also, an obligatory deal is like lending someone something if you don't want to give him a charity. We're talking here an impoverished Muslim who needs to cover his awrah. This Muslim, he's so poor he can't cover himself. He or she can't cover himself or herself properly. Now, there's an obligation on you if you're able to do something. You have options. You can just give them something, give them some clothing, or you can sell it to them, or you can lend it to them. But you can't just leave them like that when you're able to get this Muslim covered. So you'd be obligated to lend it if you don't want to just give it or sell it by credit. Yani, this person's poor, so he's not going to be able to pay you. So you can sell it to him by credit, tell him, I'll sell this to you, pay me later. Take this clothing. Or you'll say to him, here, just take this clothing. If you don't want to do either of those, then you have to say, here, take this clothing. I'll get it back from you later. And you can't leave him like that. That would be haram. Also, this valid deal could be recommended. Sometimes the deal is recommended, better for you to do, good for you to do. Like a settlement. Settlement is when there's a problem in the deal and there's a confession to a right. So you renegotiate. That's the settlement. It means you did a sale, you did a rental, you did some kind of a deal. And then it went bad. There was some misunderstanding or something somehow. And now there's a problem. Allah says in the Quran, وَالصُّلْحُ خَيْرٌ. It means settlement is good. So what do? You say, okay, it's true, I owe you. So that's the confession. There has to be a confession for a settlement. We'll come back to talk about it. You would say, it's true, I owe you. Let's do a settlement. And then you renegotiate. So you could renegotiate the sale, the terms of the sale, or you could turn that sale into a rental, or you could turn it into a gift, or like that. Settlement is the type of deal that allows you to bounce between deals, to get out of one deal and go into another one, to turn one deal into another type of deal if you needed to, or to renegotiate the terms of the existing deal. So we'll come to that, inshallah, when we see it. Also recommended is marriage for the man who has desire and he can afford it. He has desire and he can afford it. Both of those for a man. For a woman, it's enough for her to have desire. She doesn't have to afford it. For a man, to be recommended, Yani. For a man, for it to be recommended, then he needs to have desire and he can afford it. Or if there's a religious benefit in that marriage, like teaching her. Or another religious benefit is like protecting her from fornication. Then it would be recommended for a man to marry a woman who's born out of wedlock. It's not recommended to marry a woman who's born out of wedlock, but it would be if that protects her from zina. Also recommended is an easy dowry. That's clear. Also recommended are deals that help people. Helpful deals. What's a helpful deal like these ones here? Safekeeping. That means someone asks you, can you hold this for me? Hold this for me until I come back. That's recommended because you're helpful. You're helping. Or loaning an item of yours. Can I borrow your pot? Can I borrow your car? That's recommended because it's helpful. Giving interest-free loans is recommended because it's helpful. And accepting a debt transfer. We'll talk about debt transfer when we come to it. All of that is recommended because it's helpful. The Prophet ﷺ said, Wallahu fi awni al-abdi ma dama al-abdu fi awni akhihi. Allah helps the slave as long as the slave helps his brother. Another type of deal, valid deal, is a disliked one. Valid but disliked, better to avoid. Like selling or buying a mushaf, the book of Quran, disliked to sell it or buy it. Better to give it to someone than to sell it to him. But it's valid. Or selling or buying in the masjid, disliked but valid. And spending suspicious money. Suspicious money means it might be haram, but you don't have proof. Like a person has two income sources. One is haram and one is halal. He has a halal job and he has a haram job or source of income. And then he gives you some money. And you don't know, did this money come from his lawful source or his unlawful source? So it's now suspicious money. It's not haram for you to take that money, but better not to. Or a marriage for someone who lacks desire or the funds. Marriage for someone who lacks desire or lacks the funds. Because you're going to be putting a burden on yourself. If lacking desire, then that means going to be not fulfilling the desire of his wife. Because if he lacks desire himself, he won't be fulfilling his wife's desire. If he lacks the funds, it means that he won't be able to pay for what he needs to pay for. So it's disliked. Then still disliked. Because that's why it says or. For someone who lacks desire or the funds. Or serial marriage for sexual experience. Disliked, not haram. That means for a man or a woman to marry again and again and again just to have sex. Not haram. So be mindful before you dispraise a Muslim for that, male or female. Because this person at the end of the day is avoiding a very serious haram. Then you're going to turn around and dispraise them for that? It's not haram. Or marriage only for the woman to return to her previous husband. Meaning, a man divorced his wife 3 times, so now he can't take her back. And the only way for him to get her back is for her to marry another man and consummate that marriage and get divorced from him. So, if a man agrees to marry this woman only so that she can get back with her first man, that's disliked. And it's going to be valid as long as they don't put any condition in the contract. Meaning, they can't say, now I give Fulana in marriage to you so that you can consummate and then divorce her so she can get back with her first man. No condition like that. Just do a regular marriage contract. It's going to be valid. That means divorcing her won't be obligatory. She's your wife now. But maybe you said, meaning, that was your friend. He said, bro, I need you to do this favor for me. Yeah, I divorced her 3 times and I need her back. This is what I need you to do for me. And then what they would say is, so just, if you do me this favor, just only insert the head only so that it's a valid consummation. And then stop there and then divorce her after. So going through all of that without putting any conditions in the marriage contract, that's disliked, not haram. I don't know. I don't know if that's all 4 schools. But not included under disliked is a non-Arab man marrying a virgin Arab woman. That's not disliked because she's virgin Arab and he's not Arab. That's not disliked. And also disliked is divorce without a religious reason. Like he's married to a good religious woman. Has no good reason, no religious reason. A religious reason is like she doesn't pray. So divorcing her without a religious reason is disliked. The 4th type, which is forbidden, haram, but valid though, haram but valid, is like selling defective merchandise without exposing the defect. So, for example, someone sells you some bootleg stuff. You thought it's authentic, it's not authentic, it's bootleg. That's a defect. That's valid sale, and he didn't tell you that it's not authentic. It's still a valid sale, but that's haram. And if you discover the defect, you can cancel the sale. Or you can adhere to the sale. That's how we know it's valid, because you're allowed to still keep it. Yeah. It's valid to sell a defective item without telling the person about the defect, but that's haram. That's haram. How we know that's valid? We know it's valid because once you discover the defect, you're allowed to accept it and keep the item. So had it not been valid, you wouldn't have been allowed to keep the item because it's not a valid sale. When it was that you could discover a defect in your item that wasn't clarified for you and then just accept it, then we knew that it was a valid sale. So selling defective merchandise without exposing the defect is haram, but it's valid. Also, selling what is pure and beneficial to someone who will use it to sin, like selling roosters for cockfighting and selling narcotics to drug abusers, or selling weapons to someone who will assault people, selling grapes to someone who will make wine with it, selling wood to someone who's going to make haram instruments out of it. All of that's valid sale, but it's haram. We talk about If you don't know, then it's not haram, and you're not obligated to find out Also, when it comes to renting, you don't have to know what somebody's going to be doing in your property. For all you know, you're renting your home to a homosexual. Who knows? He's going to be doing bad things in there. It's not obligatory on you to know. You don't have to ask. And in so many cases, don't ask. Don't try to find out. What are you going to do with this if I sell it to you? What are you going to do with this if I rent it to you? That's their business. Leave it alone. That's probably most likely what you're going to need to do or want to do. Or selling after the second adhan of Friday for the unexcused male. A male who's obligated to go to Jumu'ah. After the second adhan, selling is haram, but not invalid. Unless, though, there is a way you can sell after the second adhan on Friday without it being haram, which is when you do the sale on the way. Like you and another brother are actively going to Jumu'ah. You're both walking towards the masjid to go to Jumu'ah. And while you're walking, without even stopping, he says, hey, sell me that watch of yours. You say, okay, I accept for $20. Then you give him the watch, he gives you the money, and you keep going to Jumu'ah without stopping. That's valid. And it's not haram. Or giving a gift when that prevents one from paying for an obligation. Also important. Giving a gift, giving a charity when that stops you from an obligation. You have, for example, a wife you're obligated to support, and there's a charity that you'd like to give. And you can only do one or the other, then which one you're going to do? You're going to support your wife because it's obligatory. You're not going to give the charity and then not be able to support your wife. Also, haram is, but valid, marrying another wife while knowing that one is unable to do his obligations. Valid marriage, but it's haram. And also divorcing the wife in the inappropriate way. Divorcing her in the inappropriate way means while she's menstruating. Or she's not menstruating, but you had intercourse with her during that non-menstruating time. If you want to divorce her appropriately, the prophetic way to divorce a menstruating woman is to wait until she's not menstruating and then not to have intercourse with her and divorce her then, during a non-menstruating time that had no intercourse in it. The forbidden sale is usually valid. The forbidden sale is usually invalid. Usually invalid. When haram sale is going to be valid, like all these cases we talked about, what makes the haram sale valid is that it wasn't haram because of the sale. It was haram for another reason. When it's haram for another reason, an outside reason, then it's going to be valid, but it's going to be haram. Like Friday. When that man is going to Jumu'ah, why is valid if he did sell? Because it's haram for the Jumu'ah, not for the sale. It's not the sale, it's the Jumu'ah, something outside. So that's why it's still valid sale, but it's haram. Or he wants to use those grapes to make wine. So it's not for the sale itself that made it haram, it's for something outside the sale. So it's still going to be valid, but it's going to be haram. But the forbidden sale is usually invalid, and spending money sinfully is a major sin, as a rule. بذل المال في الحرام كبيرة. Spending money on haram is a major sin. That's a rule. Wallahu ta'ala a'lam. Allah knows best. We'll stop there. Any question? Yes, brother. Go ahead. Okay. If it were really fake, then you can't stop them from breaching this. Yani, let me use the word defective. If it were truly defective and you never clarified the defect, even if you didn't know it was defective, but it was, and then they brought to your attention, this is defective, I want to cancel this sale. They have the right to religiously. You're not allowed to deny them canceling that sale. Ameen wa iyyakum. Yes. Mm-hmm. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. Yes, he still owes her the mut'ah. Even if she remarried him, he still owes her the mut'ah from the first time and the dowry from the first time. Yes. If the customer believes he's getting something that's not a replica, so when you say replica, if the customer believes that it's not a replica, but it is a replica, then that would be a defect if you don't clarify for him. This means that he's being deceived here. Had he known, he wouldn't have bought it. I mean, what?